Her head was severed with a single stroke on the scaffold at Tower Green. It was the morning of February 13th, 1542. She had been led from her cell in the Tower of London, past the frozen courtyard where others had died before her. Eyewitnesses recorded that she remained composed, knelt, and submitted to the axe without protest. By royal order, her body was buried in an unmarked grave in the nearby chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula next to the remains of her cousin, Anne Boleyn, who had met the same fate 6 years earlier. Catherine Howard, approximately 19 years old, was the fifth wife of King Henry VIII. Less than 2 years after their marriage, she was executed for adultery and treason. Unlike others before her, she received no formal trial. Parliament had passed a bill of attainder against her, condemning her by legislation, not evidence in court. She had once been Queen of England. He didn't begin as a tyrant, just a voice and a crowd that listened. Catherine Howard was born between 1523 and 1525, most likely in Lambeth, England. She was the daughter of Lord Edmund Howard, a younger son of the Duke of Norfolk, and Joyce Culpeper. Though her family held noble titles, they lived in relative financial instability. Her father, though of high birth, had no great estates or political power. Catherine's early years were shaped by this contrast: noble blood without noble security. Her mother died when she was young. Around the age of 8 or 9, Catherine was sent to live in the household of Agnes Tilney, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, her step-grandmother. The Duchess oversaw the education and upbringing of several noble girls. Supervision was minimal. The environment was loosely structured, especially at night, where young attendants often shared rooms and beds unsupervised. This household played a crucial role in Catherine's development. She received basic education in reading, music, and deportment skills suitable for court life. But more importantly, it was in this setting that she formed early personal relationships that would later be used against her. There was no clear plan for her advancement. Her family did not push for strategic marriage or position. She was one of many young noblewomen with connections, but no strong prospects. Nevertheless, her surname Howard carried weight at court. The Howards were ambitious, politically active, and well aware of the importance of aligning themselves with the king's interests. Her beauty and manner were noted early. Reports describe her as lively, graceful, and charming. Her appeal would soon draw the king's attention, but at this stage, she was simply one of many young women hoping to advance within the machinery of Tudor court life. But this early promise would later give way to violence and control. Catherine Howard's early influences were not formal tutors or political mentors, but the informal, unsupervised culture of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk's household. Unlike royal wards or scholarly protégés, Catherine's development was shaped by proximity, by what she observed and experienced, rather than what she was taught. By her early teens, she had formed personal relationships that would later be defined as inappropriate or scandalous. Around the age of 13, she engaged in a flirtation, possibly more, with her music teacher, Henry Mannix. Mannix was significantly older and later claimed their relationship had not been consummated, though letters and testimonies suggested otherwise. This was followed by a more serious entanglement with Frances Derham, a former secretary in the Duchess's household. Derham referred to her as his wife, and the two shared a degree of intimacy that, by Tudor standards, could imply an informal pre-contract. In 16th century England, such a contract, if prevent, could render a future royal marriage invalid. These relationships did not occur in isolation. They reflected the loose moral oversight common in lesser aristocratic households. The Howard family was powerful, but their internal structures were often poorly managed. The Duchess's household, meant to provide discipline and training, offered instead an environment of whispered liaisons, shared dormitories, and minimal adult control. Catherine's behavior was not uncommon among girls her age and status. What made it significant was not the conduct itself, but the context into which she would later rise. As queen, her past would become a matter of national politics. No one in her early life appears to have prepared her for the expectations of royal scrutiny. There is no record of serious moral instruction, no strategic guidance. Her name was known, but she was unprepared for the machinery of state that would soon envelop her. Even the Howard family, known for ambition, did not position her in a calculated way. Her entrance to court as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Cleves in late 1539 was seen as routine. That she would attract the attention of Henry VIII was not foreseen. Soon, those ideas would be put to the test, not in theory, but in power. Catherine Howard joined the royal court in late 1539 as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Cleves. At that point, Anne's marriage to Henry VIII had already begun to falter. The king was disappointed in his new queen, both personally and politically. Their relationship remained unconsummated, and the marriage quickly became a source of embarrassment to Henry. By early 1540, Catherine had caught the king's eye. She was young, graceful, and markedly different from Anne. Courtiers noted the attention she received. Her rise was rapid, unusually so. Within months, she was moved to private chambers and received expensive gifts. On July 9, 1540, Henry's marriage to Anne was annulled on grounds of non-consummation and mutual consent. Barely 3 weeks later, on July 28, Henry married Catherine Howard in a private ceremony at Oatlands Palace. At the time of their marriage, Catherine was probably no older than 17. Henry was 49, overweight, and suffering from leg ulcers that left him often in pain. But for a time, he was visibly delighted with his new wife. He called her his rose without a thorn. She was publicly honored, paraded at court, and praised for restoring joy to the aging king. Her family, the Howards, also gained from this union. Their influence at court increased. Her uncle, Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, had long been a powerful figure and now stood even closer to the king. Yet their ambitions remained partially concealed. Publicly, Catherine was presented as innocent and apolitical. Despite her title, Catherine was not deeply involved in matters of governance. She attended ceremonies, issued minor patronage, and maintained a royal household. There is no record of her advancing specific policies or forming a political faction. Her power was symbolic, drawn from her position as queen and her favor with the king. But beneath the surface, complications remained. Individuals who had known her before her marriage, particularly those familiar with her past in the Duchess's household, were still active at court. Her former relationship with Francis Derham in particular would become a threat, and her private conduct, once invisible, would soon come under scrutiny. Now in power, Catherine began turning belief into law and law into control. Catherine Howard's position as queen brought status but not safety. Less than a year into her marriage, rumors began to surface about her past. In autumn 1541, Mary Lascelles, a former servant in the Duchess of Norfolk's household, informed her brother John Lascelles, a reform-minded court official, that Catherine had been involved in sexual relationships before her marriage. He passed the information to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer brought the accusations directly to Henry VIII in a private letter on November 1, 1541. At first, the king refused to believe it, but an investigation was ordered. Catherine was questioned. So were her former acquaintances, including Henry Manox and Francis Derham. Under interrogation, Derham admitted to a relationship and claimed they had been betrothed. This had legal weight if true. It could make Catherine's marriage to the king invalid. Worse followed. In searching for evidence, officials uncovered letters suggesting an affair between Catherine and Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. The letters hinted at secret meetings and strong emotional attachment. One letter, in her handwriting, read, "It makes my heart die to think I cannot always be in your company." This was no longer a matter of past conduct. It was an accusation of adultery while married to the king, legally treason under the 1534 Treason Act. Catherine was confined to her chambers in Hampton Court Palace on November 12th. She reportedly tried to speak with the king, even breaking free from guards in an attempt to reach him. She was restrained and removed from court. Her household was disbanded. Key servants were arrested and interrogated. Some were tortured. Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper were tried in December. Both were found guilty. Culpeper was beheaded. Derham, considered more culpable due to his past intimacy, was hanged, drawn, and quartered. Catherine was not tried in court. Instead, Parliament passed a Bill of Attainder, declaring her guilty without a trial. The act also made it a crime for any future queen not to disclose her sexual history to the king. By early February 1542, the legal mechanisms had been completed. The young queen was stripped of her title and held in the Tower of London, awaiting execution. Catherine was no longer just enforcing ideas now. Those ideas were becoming systems of control. The fall of Catherine Howard did not happen in isolation. It marked the tightening of a broader system of surveillance and repression within Henry VIII's court and institutional response to perceived disloyalty, sexual misconduct, and political threat. The machinery of control that had emerged earlier under Thomas Cromwell was now being used against members of the royal family themselves. Once suspicions arose, the Privy Council moved with precision. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer coordinated the inquiry, assisted by Thomas Wriothesley, Secretary of State, and Richard Rich, a key legal enforcer. Their methods included private interrogations, seizure of personal correspondence, and where needed physical coercion. Francis Derham was subjected to torture during questioning. His testimony was used not only to implicate Catherine, but also to uncover the full network of her previous contacts. Thomas Culpeper, a favored member of the king's inner circle, confessed under pressure and provided damaging admissions. Both men were tried in December 1541 and executed at Tyburn on December 10th. Culpeper received beheading. Derham was sentenced to the traditional execution for traitors, hanging, drawing, and quartering. His mutilated remains were displayed publicly. Several of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting were imprisoned and interrogated. Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford, widow of George Boleyn and former sister-in-law to Anne Boleyn, was arrested for allegedly facilitating the meetings between Catherine and Culpeper. She was judged insane, but a special parliamentary act overrode the legal protection normally afforded to the mentally unfit. She was condemned alongside Catherine and executed the same day. The Bill of Attainder, passed in February 1542, extended royal power in unprecedented ways. It allowed for the execution of individuals without trial, based solely on the king's will and the parliament's consent. It also criminalized silence. Anyone who failed to report immoral behavior by a queen could be prosecuted. This shift turned personal behavior into a matter of state security. Intimacy, once private, was now political. The legal consequences of youthful relationships, unspoken histories, or court gossip became fatal. The Queen's chamber became a space of fear. Catherine's imprisonment was not marked by public protest. The court closed ranks. Few spoke in her defense. Her youth and inexperience were not considered mitigating factors. Her fate served as an example. Proximity to the king required complete submission not only in behavior, but in personal history. Her execution was carried out at Tower Green, a space reserved for noble blood. She was beheaded privately, without large public crowds. According to witnesses, she faced death calmly. Tradition, though unconfirmed, holds that she declared, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." Whether spoken or not, the phrase became part of her legacy, a warning of the costs of secrecy, passion, and royal disfavor. Even individuals close to Catherine were targeted by these systems. By the time Catherine Howard was imprisoned, her connections, personal and political, had collapsed. Nearly everyone who had once supported her withdrew or was forced into silence. Fear of association with the accused queen led to mass distancing. Even her own family, the powerful Howards, fell under suspicion. Several relatives were questioned and detained. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, issued a public letter condemning her conduct to protect his own position at court. Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford, was a key figure in Catherine's final months. Having once served Anne Boleyn and survived her downfall, she had returned to court and acted as a lady-in-waiting to Catherine. She was accused of arranging and concealing meetings between the Queen and Thomas Culpeper. Whether she did so willingly or under pressure is unclear. Nonetheless, she was arrested, declared insane, and still condemned to death by a special parliamentary act. Her final days were spent in the Tower, sharing the same fate she had once watched unfold for her sister-in-law. Other women in Catherine's household, such as Lady Rochford's servants and Catherine's chamber attendants, were interrogated and threatened with punishment for their silence. Many provided statements under pressure. Some tried to minimize their roles. Others offered detailed confessions in exchange for leniency. Catherine, isolated from court and family, was left without allies. No letters of protest or petitions for clemency survive. Henry VIII, once deeply infatuated, never saw her again after her arrest. He signed the Bill of Attainder without recorded hesitation. The man who had called her his rose without a thorn made no public statements of grief or regret. Fear gripped the court. The case had made it clear. Personal history was no longer private, and no one, however close to the throne, was safe from scrutiny. Paranoia spread among the nobility. Whispered conversations, old relationships, forgotten letters, anything could become evidence. The system that condemned Catherine required participation from those closest to her. It rewarded silence and punished memory. Every relationship became suspect. Signs of strain in leadership and personal stability were now evident. By early 1542, Catherine Howard was confined to the Tower of London, awaiting execution. Although she had no documented physical illnesses, accounts from those who observed her suggest a sharp mental decline in the weeks leading to her death. Reports from Tower guards and staff describe her as anxious, withdrawn, and at times incoherent. She exhibited signs of shock when told she would be executed. According to one account, she requested a block be brought to her chamber so that she might practice laying her head upon it. While this story may be apocryphal, it illustrates the psychological toll her imprisonment had taken. She was 19 years old, with no legal training, no political leverage, and no advocates remaining. Her sudden elevation to queenship had lasted barely 18 months. The collapse of her world was total. Family removed, household dismantled, name erased from public ceremonies. Her physical surroundings were stark. The royal apartments in the Tower, once used for coronations and receptions, had been converted into a prison space. Catherine's chambers were sparsely furnished. She was allowed limited contact with attendants. Every interaction was monitored. The king, meanwhile, was descending into his own period of instability. Henry VIII had grown increasingly paranoid. His physical health had worsened. Open ulcers on his legs left him in near constant pain. He was increasingly isolated and prone to bursts of anger. Physicians and courtiers noted his volatile moods and obsessive suspicion. The downfall of Catherine only deepened these tendencies. The process of condemning her had required a public denial of personal judgment. He had chosen her, praised her, elevated her, then eliminated her. To prevent any challenge to royal authority, her execution had to be final, swift, and unambiguous. Catherine's final days were marked by strict routine. She received religious counsel and was said to pray regularly. Her meals were reduced. No visitors were permitted apart from appointed officials. There is no record of her writing a final letter. If any such document existed, it has not survived. Her behavior at the scaffold on the 13th of February, 1542, was described by witnesses as composed. She made a brief final speech, asked for mercy on her soul, and submitted to the executioner's axe without resistance. The entire ceremony took only minutes. Her body was buried nearby, unmarked and unceremonious. She was the second Queen of England to be executed by her husband. No formal investigation into the psychological effects of her imprisonment was conducted. No statements of remorse were issued by the Crown. Despite worsening health, Henry retained control over key decisions. Catherine Howard's execution was carried out on the morning of the 13th of February, 1542. She was led from her chamber to Tower Green, accompanied by a small number of witnesses and officials. Jane Boleyn, Viscountess Rochford, was executed immediately before her. The two women were buried side by side within the grounds of the Tower Chapel. The event marked a turning point not only in Catherine's life, which ended swiftly, but in Henry VIII's psychological state. Though he gave no public expression of grief, court records show he withdrew from governance for several weeks. During this time, no formal councils were held, and royal proclamations slowed. Those close to the king described him as physically and emotionally distant. There was no direct statement from Henry regarding Catherine's death, no funeral service, no official mourning period. Her name was erased from court records, her coat of arms was removed. She was retroactively denied the title of queen. In the months following her execution, Henry issued new directives concerning royal marriage. Parliament passed laws requiring any future queen to be thoroughly investigated for past conduct, and that any failure to disclose previous romantic entanglements would be punishable by death not only for the queen, but also for those who concealed such information. Henry VIII never married for love again. His next wife, Catherine Parr, was selected more for her Protestant sympathies and her ability to serve as a nurse than as a romantic partner. She was well-educated, obedient, and politically discreet. There is no record that Henry visited Catherine Howard's grave or that he spoke of her again in any official capacity. Yet her downfall remained a silent precedent used by future monarchs and ministers as justification for deeper scrutiny, harsher laws, and broader powers of control. If Catherine left behind any written last words, they have been lost to time. The only legacy that survives is the legal and political apparatus that rose in the wake of her execution. Catherine died on February 13, 1542. Power was immediately contested. Catherine Howard's execution marked the abrupt collapse of a dynastic plenone that had, briefly, promised to stabilize Henry VIII's lineage and satisfy his demand for youthful companionship. Her fall left not only a vacancy in the Queen's household but a rupture in the Howard family's ambitions. Their influence at court was reduced overnight. Several of her relatives were imprisoned, questioned, and removed from royal service. The Duke of Norfolk survived by distancing himself publicly, but the damage to the family's standing was lasting. Henry VIII, now 50 and physically deteriorating, returned to court life subdued and more isolated. The loss of Catherine followed the earlier execution of Anne Boleyn and the failed marriage to Anne of Cleves. Together, these events signaled a pattern of instability and crisis in royal domestic policy. They exposed the dangers of rapid elevation, unchecked ambition, and political opportunism in a court where alliances shifted quickly and brutally. The English nobility responded to Catherine's death with caution. Her execution had reaffirmed that royal favor could vanish overnight, and that proximity to the king was more dangerous than ever. Aristocratic households began re-evaluating how they trained and presented their daughters at court. Every noblewoman's past became a matter of public interest. Every silence could now be interpreted as complicity. The monarchy itself adjusted. The Privy Council gained more influence. Bureaucratic mechanisms hardened around the king's increasingly private rule. Surveillance expanded within the court. The selection of Henry's next wife would follow stricter protocols. Marriage was no longer seen as a personal or romantic bond. It became a tightly controlled institution of statecraft. No uprising followed Catherine's death. No major public backlash emerged. The system had worked exactly as intended, efficiently, legally, and without challenge. Her execution served as a warning that even queens could be discarded with precision and finality. What had begun as a royal love match ended in silence. There was no effort to restore her name, no rehabilitation of her legacy during Henry's lifetime. She vanished from state records as quickly as she had entered them. The historical record of Catherine began to evolve immediately. In the centuries following her death, Catherine Howard's legacy became a subject of debate among historians. Early chroniclers portrayed her as reckless and immoral, focusing on her relationships with Francis Dereham and Thomas Culpeper as evidence of personal failure and betrayal. In these accounts, She was depicted as a cautionary figure, naive at best, manipulative at worst. Later interpretations offered a more complex view. By the 19th and 20th centuries, historians began examining her upbringing and lack of education as central to her downfall. Unlike other queens, Catherine had received no formal political or moral training. She was raised in a loosely managed noble household where supervision was minimal and expectations were unclear. Many scholars began to describe her not as a seductress, but as a victim of structural neglect and court exploitation. Feminist historians in the late 20th century reframed Catherine's story through the lens of power dynamics. They emphasized her age, likely 17 at the time of her marriage to a king, more than 30 years her senior, and the lack of agency she had over her circumstances. These analyses questioned the fairness of laws that punished her past relationships while ignoring the king's own conduct. The legal and political machinery that led to her execution was reassessed as a system designed to protect royal reputation, not justice. There is also ongoing debate regarding the reliability of the evidence used against her. Some modern historians note that confessions were extracted under threat or torture. Letters presented as incriminating have been re-examined, and questions raised about their interpretation. Was her relationship with Culpeper romantic? Was there sufficient proof of adultery? Or was it simply circumstantial, exaggerated by those seeking to preserve favor with the king? Popular culture has shaped her legacy too. Plays, novels, and television portrayals often cast Catherine as either a tragic ingenue or a reckless flirt. These interpretations, while dramatized, reflect the enduring ambiguity surrounding her life and character. Catherine Howard remains the only English queen executed not for political treason, but for sexual conduct. The legal, cultural, and historical significance of that fact continues to provoke scholarly inquiry. Modern historians continue to debate the long-term effects of Catherine's rule. Catherine Howard's life and death left a measurable impact on the political and legal structures of Tudor England. Her execution reshaped how queens were selected, how their behavior was monitored, and how their personal histories were treated as matters of state. In response to her downfall, Parliament passed stricter laws governing royal marriages. These laws did not merely punish future misconduct, they preemptively criminalized undisclosed past behavior. This shift marked a transition in Tudor governance, from reactive punishment to preventative control. The private lives of women at court were now subject to formal inquiry. Silence, forgetfulness, or shame could carry the weight of treason. The case also clarified the absolute power of the monarch. Henry VIII needed no trial to condemn a queen. The Bill of Attainder process used against Catherine became a tool of governance, bypassing traditional legal safeguards in favor of swift political action. It reinforced the principle that personal favor, not legal precedent, determined life and death in the king's court. Catherine's death further contributed to a climate of fear that shaped the final years of Henry's reign. Courtiers and noble families became more cautious, more private, and more obedient. For women, the risks of entering the royal circle became clearer. Marriage to the king, once seen as the highest honor, was now also recognized as a mortal gamble. Culturally, Catherine's fate blurred the boundary between personal and political morality. Her youth, lack of guidance, and limited autonomy were not considered mitigating factors. In the eyes of the crown, her past was incompatible with queenship. That precedent endured, echoing in later royal scandals and institutional expectations. No monument was raised to her. No written defense was published in her time. Her legacy survives in the laws that outlived her and in the warnings that circled the English court for decades afterward. Catherine Howard's story is not one of policy or ideology. It is a story of control, how systems respond when secrecy, sexuality, and power intersect, and of how a monarchy, when threatened by intimacy, can turn even memory into a crime. What changed was not just the law, it was the cost of being seen, remembered, and known.